Okie dokie. All right, so the topic for this week, so I just read out to Paul, is basically, are the traditional methods used in teaching Aikido appropriate for the 21st century? What do we like about it? What don't we like about it? What should replace it, if anything? Anything goes in this conversation. So ding, ding, round one. Would anyone like to open? Laura.
Got a starting comment. So I just want to say that I'm glad you brought this issue to the discussion group, because I felt that when we had the interview with you, that this wasn't covered really, and it's like something that's quite unique that you've developed, your teaching style in your classes. And, you know, as students of you, then we can sort of like give that perspective. And it's it's both a teaching style in terms of how you actually, the words you use, the way you explain, questions that you ask, the level of involvement of the students, and it's also the way the dojo's run. So I think the Burwell Dojo is quite unusual in that it's a bit more democratically run. It does have leadership from Quentin from the top, but so much discussion is encouraged and input. It really feels more like a dialogue or a discussion group, a bit like this forum that Quentin started here. And I think that's really productive, and we find it really helpful as students. I mean, we're opinionated, we like to talk, and it makes us feel valued, and we can contribute then, rather than if we were just students that were not allowed to have opinions, then I guess we probably would have left and formed our own dojo for now. So yeah, that's my starter.
Well, thank you for that. Better it came from you than from me, because who knows how it's received. I just know what I do. Just expanding on that a little bit, I don't believe personally that it's that students should be put in a position where they can't question anything that goes on the mat. So I ask my students to challenge me on anything they like, and it doesn't matter if we disagree, or I get the chance to educate them, or they get the chance to educate me. It really isn't important. The point is that they should feel free to come to ask, and not feel that it's inappropriate to ask. So that's really what Laura's talking about by way of dialogue.
How did you possibly get that quotation in the video that I'm about finished with? Those are the same words that I use to describe the research and development dojo.
Well, Paul, you and I have often shared thinking, so it's no great surprise. But I guess maybe it's helpful if we just set down what the traditional methods of teaching Aikido are, because I don't want to misrepresent that. I think it should be a shared view, and then we've got something to discuss. Anyone want to start us off on that one, on what do you see as being the traditional values of teaching Aikido?
Forging warriors.
Say that again.
I think that the traditional way of teaching all Japanese martial arts is repetition, repetition, repetition. You don't want to put the mind into it, because that slows down the action. When you're confronting somebody who's trying to hurt you, you don't want to think through which technique you use. It should be in your body and just fire off the reflex, which allows for pretty good training of people that are going to fighting wars with this stuff. But if I had been in one of those samurai training units, it's been 50 years since I started Aikido. I'm just starting to understand it. I go up to the daimyo and I say, I understand it finally. And he says, you're 45 years too late. The bloody war is done. It wouldn't do any good to have people like me in there. But I've developed, and I think you've developed, a very similar style of teaching and learning, because it allows us to use the intellect as part of what we're training. And that makes it available for use in daily life. If you just learn the movements, I finally understood why many high-ranking Aikidos haven't a clue about applying in daily life. because they're putting in movements and they're not concerned with adaptability or the paradigms or anything else. Just do it and kill the guy and go home and eat supper.
So let me just summarize that and just see whether we've got general agreement. Firstly, it focuses on repetition. Secondly, there's a great focus on repetition of technique. And thirdly, we're not supposed to think, we're just supposed to do. Is that a fair summary?
I think so.
Do people agree that that's a fair representation of what might be considered a traditional Aikido teaching approach?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I would just add that.
Can I just let Linda go first?
Mhm.
Oh, sorry.
Go on, Linda.
Yeah, I would add that there's the idea of stealing the technique, that you should just watch what your teacher's doing and not have it explained to you, but grasp it on your own.
Yeah. So steal the technique, grasp it on your own. Okay. Was that you, Corky, who wanted to pitch in?
Oh, I was going to say something similar, that emulation is a big part of that thing that Linda just said, that basically.
Okay.
That it's copying what you see and trying to draw your own conclusions from what you see.
That is true, but when I started some time ago, you weren't allowed to question. You weren't allowed to even speak to the instructor. You had to go via a first dan or whatever, get permission virtually for anything you did in the dojo. And that was here in the mid-50s. It changed gradually up to about sort of late 60s, really. And you'd be very lucky even then to find teachers there. I mean, a lot of them were first dan, so-called experts, so you had to do what you were told then.
So I think that it isn't generally encouraged to question, but I don't think you get beaten over the head anymore if you do that. What I do think you get beaten over the head for doing is challenging. So if you actually say, that doesn't make much sense to me, how does that work with what you showed us last week, for example, or whatever, that would quite possibly go down quite badly in many dojos. Yeah. So are we in agreement that maybe questions aren't encouraged, but challenges are definitely not on?
But Quentin, it seems to me you're discussing Aikido, but not teaching. So if that scenario that you've just described occurred in a classroom, it would be unacceptable.
Yeah, it would be.
So we're talking about a practice of Aikido rather than the teaching. If we want to get to the essence, surely we need to understand what teaching means. And in Aikido and many martial arts, teaching holds no rank. So by that I mean, the higher your rank in the art determines who teaches, not the quality of the teacher.
Agreed. That is one of the potential problems with Aikido. That
it's a huge problem. It's not a potential. It's a massive problem.
Okay. So rank versus teaching ability is possibly a problem in Aikido. Okay, Laura. Yes. Laura.
I want to say the flip side of this this traditional method is that if you have respect and trust and patience for your teacher, then you keep showing up even though you don't really understand it, and even though you may have questions and it may not seem like that logical, or it might be like a bit baffling or mysterious to you, because Aikido isn't that obvious. I came at it after doing karate and I was like, why wouldn't you just punch someone in the face? Why go to all this bother? But I thought, you know what, there is something in this. It's interesting and I want to hear what they've got to say. So I did hold back some of that cynicism and skepticism to give them a chance to show me. And, you know, because it takes patience to learn Aikido. You have to have a certain amount of commitment and perseverance, because it's not a quick learn.
Okay, so let me try and summarize that. So what we're saying is that on the positive side, it encourages respect and persistence.
Yeah.
Okay. I might challenge persistence. I think if nobody was willing to answer my questions, I'm not sure I would have been very persistent, because I like asking questions and knowing why I'm doing what I'm doing and understanding the reasons for it. So, but others might feel differently about that.
Yeah,
I
but
suppose it's not just verbal though, is it? Like sometimes we encourage people to feel it.
Sure.
and also, are you kind of like talking about kind of like teaching kind of Aikido in the West or the East? Because kind of like in Japan, persistence is you know, highly rewarded. Kind of like, you know, even when you show kind of like loyalty, respect, and you really want to learn it despite all the difficulties, despite the kind of like the culture, because it is accepted that, like, you know, this kind of like top-down hierarchy. So it's kind of like almost part of life. So it's not necessarily kind of challenging that. Kind of like,
so I think that culture makes a big difference to how you may choose to teach. And I think I totally accept the point that in Japan, teaching in a more traditional way is far more likely to go down well than it would, well, with me personally, but generally in the West, shall we say.
yeah, because it's almost accepted practice to be like this.
But I guess what I'm coming down to, so you professionally are a teacher.
Yeah.
All right. So, and teaching has evolved over time as to what works and what doesn't work. So making children just do their times table by repetition and not asking questions and just doing it by rote, we would no longer think is acceptable form of teaching. So what I'm basically saying to you is it may be people get away with teaching in a traditional way, but is it the most effective way of passing Aikido information on?
I think what you have to focus on is effective for what? When you say passing on Aikido, what is Aikido? What is it that you want to pass on? And until you specify that, you can't say whether it's a good way of doing it.
Well, as always, Paul, you've grounded us, and that's a totally acceptable comment. But we could spend the whole night then discussing what is Aikido, and we both know that it's different things to different people. And someone was wanting to chip in there. Sorry, no. Yeah, for me, it's a practice about taking it off the mat, but for other people, it's just a bunch of technique on the mat.
Well, I mean, some people take it off the mat and go into bars and get into fights with it. Depends what you want to do off the mat.
Sure. And it depends on your definition of what's Aikido and what's not. And so I don't think I want to go down that particular rabbit hole, because actually I'm talking about teaching skills, and it doesn't really matter what skills that you believe in and you want to pass on. And we're talking about this is maybe one for you to comment on, Corey, as being in teaching as well. I'm talking about just the methodology of passing on information, and how perhaps in Aikido we've bypassed all the developments of education in the last, 100 or so years.
Well, I'm not an expert in education per se. I'm kind of in that way teaching. I teach philosophy and say Western philosophy, analytic philosophy. And we're not trained generally as teachers, kind of like Aikido instructors generally aren't trained as teachers either. We just love what we do, and we do our best to convey, why we love what we do and to get people engaged with it. So I guess, but I have to say, just from a student's perspective, I did judo for about 20 years. And about 15 in, I started Aikido, but I was relatively old already. What was that about? I was about 44, I guess. And from my particular perspective, I've been blessed with, Corky's one of my two main teachers, along with my teacher here in Round Rock, and they both let me ask questions, and they're generous with doing their best to explain what they're doing. And I feel like I can see if I started when I was 14, maybe I would be able to steal enough techniques by the time I'm my age to do a little bit of Aikido. I don't know. But I feel like there was zero chance me starting at 44 to sort of just do rote technique practice for the next 30 years and then hope I start to learn something then. So I feel particularly, you know, and a lot of Aikido, I'm not that unique. A lot of people take up Aikido when they're, after they've done some martial arts, they're middle-aged or something. And I think it's particularly valuable for us to have teachers who will allow questions. I mean, it helps also that I'm, you know, as a philosopher, that's kind of what I tend to do professionally anyway. That's my mindset. So it, naturally, I want to understand what's going on, and it's really been a, you know, wonderful to engage with teachers like Corky and my other teacher, Brendan.
So that's the second time that phrase "stealing technique" has come up, and I think my response to that is, why isn't it that the teachers aren't gifting it? Why does it have to be stolen? Corky.
Quentin, I have a
Can I
thought
just say,
on that.
Corky, Linda, can I just say,
Sorry.
Corky
Oh,
coming
sorry.
in,
Yeah,
he
of course.
just had his hand up before you. Corky, unmute. Unmute. Unmute first. You're muted.
Thanks.
Now we can hear you.
Thank you. I was going to say that I think that sometimes this technique has to be stolen because there isn't a whole lot of understanding of what the dynamics are. I think that Sensei did something that most of its students really didn't understand. I didn't really kind of start understanding until I started reading Paul's writings. And by then I was already looking to how does this extend off the mat, because the stuff that we're doing in here is limited. You know, we're doing 20, 30 techniques. And then like Paul mentioned earlier, I think we're training our bodies to do this, but I found that to be a deterrent to actual Aikido.
Okay.
Because then my mind got stuck in these set ways of doing things.
I agree that you can't teach, well, this may be part of what you're saying, that you can't learn a lot of technique from hearing a bunch of words or watching. It has to be felt. And I think that's part of the dynamic of good teaching, is that you use all the modalities to pass information on. So if that's what you mean by stealing, you have to feel it and eventually let it come into your body, I buy that. But I don't like that phrase stealing. I think that's part of the generosity of the teacher, that they're making sure that all their students get to feel it. Not just maybe, you know, their star student and then they watch from afar, which I have seen happen. Nick.
Well, can I add to this? But like, you know, because when you talked about effectiveness in Aikido, you would mean perhaps effectiveness into bringing understanding to the larger amount kind of like of people. Because not always effective teaching would be able, for example, to reach kind of like, or at least what we consider effective teaching or modern ways of pedagogy into kind of like, and be effective in the way that you are transmitting knowledge. So as people, for example, have to feel it, to have to hear it, you know, kind of be analyzed. Sometimes you have to step outside of your own boundaries to realize that, like, you know, what I know best may not perhaps be the best way of transmitting something to the student. Obviously, it is a prerequisite that you need to understand what is Aikido, kind of what is its scope, kind of like what its philosophical extensions, and how you use it.
You're taking, again, I don't want to get diverted tonight as to, you know, what we believe Aikido is.
No, I'm talking about how can you be kind of like effective, or at least what effectiveness is in transmitting the knowledge.
Yes, well, that's
modern
what we're here to
methods, you
discuss.
can use traditional methods, whatever works.
Yeah, and I think the thing is you have to change the modality depending on the student.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's what I was
Finn, do you want to kick in? Finn next, and then
sorry,
we'll move.
yeah, I'm just querying. I think maybe we should acknowledge that this idea of teaching and students is maybe a Western or a modern take on it. It's possibly it's more sort of sensei student relationship, which is more about somebody walking the path before you, so not necessarily teaching and a knowledge structure, but more just sharing a practice. So I've enjoyed my Aikido practice, but I've never been part of a club where it was about learning a syllabus. And I've often wondered what it would have been like. I think I would have learned faster, but not necessarily, it would have been a different experience.
Again, I think whatever you're teaching, you've gone before your students. So I don't think it matters what it is you're teaching or the emphasis you put on it. It's how do you do it? It comes back to really what Hugh was saying earlier. There is a difference between being a great practitioner and being a great teacher. And the link between those two maybe has not been strongly made in Aikido in the past. Joanna, did you have something to say? Do you want to unmute yourself?
Hi everyone. I don't know if this is related to everything that all of you were talking about, but I was thinking that probably I think I'm here the most that have my time of teaching is short than every one of you, but I think I'm a little closer to being only a student, in that place that one of my senses I could ask everything, any doubts, any questions that I had. The other one I couldn't ask this too much, but just thinking about for us to remember a little backwards when we were students, and by the time we were doing this repetition of the techniques and the movement, when was the time that our body started to talk to us about, okay, what am I feeling this? Is this making sense to me? Is this not making sense? It's my body asking questions, not my mind. Not, okay, I should do shomen or yokomen like this, but when was the time that my body got in doubt or got curious about the movement, and when my body wanted to talk to my sensei or to my partners when I was practicing with them, and also what happens in this other side, in the side of learning, and also how can we bring this to our teaching today? So
you've raised quite a lot of things there, and I'm relating it to our conversation earlier in the week. So basically, what you're saying with that, as far as I can see, is you are your own teacher to a very great degree. And actually, you know what you need. And I know that you have explored other things that you've brought back onto the mat. And that's another aspect of traditional teaching that is very often frowned upon. You know, they don't encourage you even to go to another Aikido teacher, let alone to go and practice other arts and see if there's any wisdom that you can bring back onto the mat from that. And that strikes me as pretty unhealthy. Most of the major developments in Aikido have come from outside. Linda, sorry, I cut you off earlier, so now is your chance for glory.
Oh boy. Something taking off on what we were talking about before about whether the traditional way of teaching is the best way to impart this kind of knowledge, about what Corey said about, I think it was Corey, about coming in. I started at 46, so kind of around the same, mid-age time frame. As someone who's come up in this culture, and in the US, Southern California, question all your teachers openly culture, the idea of don't ask, just feel, shut up and watch kind of teaching felt very mean to me. It felt like, I'm not going to tell you, get lost. I think what we need to do, I think that way of teaching, that what we're calling stealing technique or learning by feeling, just watching and getting it, I think that's a really valid way to teach and really valuable. But kids in other cultures come up learning that. They don't get blindsided by it at 46 when they're not used to it. So I think one thing we need to do when we're using that is teach students how to learn that way. There are some tricks that I've used, like like watching my teacher and imagining what that feels like, when somebody grabs him, what's he sensing in that, where do those muscles feel like they're moving, like put myself in my imagination in that. But it took years for me to learn those things. And so it felt very awkward to me to learn that way. And I think it's possible to teach in that traditional way and accelerate students' learning by teaching them how to take advantage of it better.
Yeah, super.
Can I come back on that one?
Steve, can I just let Finn come back in and then I'll come back to you, okay?
Sorry, just another
yeah,
random
no worries.
introduction, but I'm just wondering if Aikido, how unique Aikido is in having a rolling intake of people who are always learning at different levels, all in the same class, and people sharing, teaching each other. So I don't know how it is in different clubs, but in my club, I suppose the reason we haven't followed a syllabus precisely is because everybody's always starting anew, and then you're learning by teaching others as you gain more experience or sharing your experience. And then,
yeah. Well, let's ask Paul, because he's done a few martial arts. How common is it to have people of such huge differentiated abilities practicing together on the mat in Aikido?
Well, I have a shodan in karate as well, and in the different styles that I played around with until I decided which one I wanted to major in, it's very common. That's the way the clubs always were. And you'd have people branching off. You do this kata, we'll work on you for this kata. But there's always a range of skills as far as I know.
Okay, thank you.
But there is one other thing. Can I make a comment, or is somebody in the middle?
Well, you make your comment, then I'm going to go to Steve.
Okay. There is a book by a guy named Ingold Hasselbach. The title is Führer X. He's an ex-neo-Nazi, ex-skinhead, that when the wall fell, he realized that he met people that he hated, but he'd never met anyone before. When he met them, turned out he liked them. But he described how you train a dog to be vicious. You feed it and pet it and kick it. So it'll relate to you as the person who feeds and pets it, and it'll turn the anger outward onto whomever you want it to attack. That's a very effective way of teaching. But you could do Aikido that way. But I think I'm going to be nasty and say you cannot describe which is an effective way of teaching without saying what you want to teach. And there are differences.
Let me go to Steve, and then I want to come to Corky, who was nodding his head vigorously there. Steve, what did you want to say?
I just wanted to reaffirm my previous statement by saying that what I mean by asking questions is to get a visual representation of what's going on into my head, and then having to feel that to confirm that.
So for everybody else's benefit, Steve's blind.
So what you're talking about is from a visual standpoint.
Yeah.
Which I'm finding not uncomfortable, but I can't answer in the same way.
Sure.
And
what you're making clear, Steve, and which what I said earlier, is that you have to use different modalities to teach different people. So Steve practices with me, and I had to adapt my teaching hugely for him, because obviously he couldn't see what I was doing. So I always had to make sure that every single technique I grabbed him and I took him through the technique so he could feel it, for him to understand what it was I was trying to do. I would give him words as well, but the combination of those two were what he needs to learn it.
But what we're doing now is to try and get that put into a way that can be adapted to other blind people to work with that too.
Sure.
So that is not as easy as it appears, because you've got to get around the fear of training, which sighted people don't have.
Oh, I think there are a few people that have it, Steve, but I can understand that it's probably true for blind.
Yeah, it's a different type of thing. But technically, I mean, I trained a long time, but that doesn't mean I'm any better. It just means that it's just a lifetime spent in gathering information that can be used, hopefully. And it changed my life as well, the way I do things. So the whole essence of Aikido, it brushes off that way.
Sure.
So, but teaching it for the future is, I hope, going to be easier than the past, because the past was absolutely useless to the majority of people. If in this country, if you were first dan, you were regarded as an expert.
Yeah. I just want to also add that Steve
So you
has
have to
been,
establish a teaching thing like the BAB coaching or whatever it might be. Doesn't mean you're a good teacher even.
Yeah.
It's just a piece of paper that you go back to a dojo with.
Yeah. But it's a starting point. So I'm going to go to Corky and then I'm going to come to John, who had his hand up.
Oh, I was going to say John can go. He had his hand up. So
What I want to just, I want to add a bit more information about Steve and just tell you that he taught his own dojo for many, many years. So there's an interesting way. I mean, he had to teach differently because he couldn't see what was going on. Go on, John, your turn.
Yeah, all it is, say thanks because my tea's ready. I've got to go. My wife's done my tea. So thank you very much. And I'll join again. Yeah,
Okay.
I'll join again. Thank you.
Right, super. Patrick, did you have something to say? Or were you just waving goodbye? You were just waving goodbye, weren't you?
Hold on, I will say a couple things. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to say this is really hard to put into words what we're trying to do, because as human beings, we're very complex. And sometimes when I practice Aikido, I have really deeper level experiences with different people that words just do not describe. And sometimes they come very deeply, like I'll hardly do something and they'll just move and fall, but I don't know what I'm doing. So I wouldn't even know how you teach that level, for one thing. The other thing I would like to say about the traditional level is, from the Japanese point of view, from a lot I read, it was about the transmission from the teacher to the student, the direct transmission through the contact. Now, of course, again, this is on many levels, not just physical. And I think part of the problem is our main brain, our main consciousness is mainly in the physical, yet there's other parts of us that are working at these different levels. And just to wrap this up, I often find when I get out of that conscious level of I get out of my way is what I'm trying to say, really interesting things happen that I cannot put into words, that I wouldn't even know how to teach. And I think for a lot of us here, those are the more interesting things about Aikido than you might get just with the physical side of it, and that's it. And that's all I wanted to say.
Okay, well, I could chip in with a response to that, but anybody else want to say anything before I do? Okay, well, I'm going to say that I think one of the problems is one of the things that we talked about at the beginning, which is that if you get lost in teaching in the realm of technique, you may get better, but you might not know why you're getting better. One of the things that I do, this is my method. I teach principle. That's all I teach. I only teach principle. I just happen to use technique as a vehicle to carry the principle that I want to show on that particular night, or principles that I'm showing on that particular night. So I'm always saying this is about centering, or it's about being grounded, or it's about being focused, or whatever it is I'm particularly blathering on about that particular evening. So people associate the principle with the physical experience, and the shape of the technique becomes more of an irrelevance. Right? I mean, there's a reason why you have to do it one particular way as opposed to another very often. It won't work necessarily if you don't perform the sequence of moves in a vaguely sensible way. But that's one way that you can shortcut this idea of you suddenly experience and think, well, what the hell was that? If you've been told all along, well, this is what that is, then you begin to make the label association a little bit more easy. Corky, any thoughts? I thought you might.
Yeah, I was going to say that the thing that we keep kind of brushing to the side is purpose. And I know that it's one of those things that we kind of like, well, what is the purpose of Aikido? But we all have a purpose for studying it. And I think that ultimately, in some regards, self-defense comes into it, because none of us come into Aikido the way we come into tango dancing, for instance. There's a purpose for Aikido, and a purpose defined by a sensei. And for me, the purpose is non-violent conflict resolution. So the idea that we're practicing hours and hours and hours and hours every week for this 3 seconds in our life when someone's going to throw a haymaker at us is kind of silly. But if we use the physical practice to teach us about ourselves, then we start learning how we react under pressure. And then we can transform that, how we act under pressure in a physical sense, to how we operate under pressure in an emotional sense in our day-to-day lives. When we're taking all these things like a grab to the wrist, things that we hear in the news, things that our friends say to us, things that we interact with our coworkers or people that we get into conflicts with, how do we view that? How do we step into that mindset in which we are about resolving this conflict rather than getting our way? And so for me, I've completely abandoned technique-based practice almost 2 decades ago, because I found that it was ineffective in those kind of things. I had the unique experience of being attacked in the dojo by someone who didn't know Aikido but knew how to fight. And even though I politely had my arm out and saying, please grab my wrist, I'll show you something, he said, well, I'll grab your throat. So this is after 18 years of practice. And I suddenly realized I knew many techniques that I'd practiced hundreds and hundreds of times, and none of them worked, you know, when push came to shove. And so I had to sit back after 18 years and go, whatever I was doing didn't work. And this kind of mirrored the experience that I read Kanshu Tsunedamari in Japan mentioned, that he'd, you know, practiced with O-sensei and then gone down and opened his dojo in the south of Japan where no one had heard of Aikido. And they would come in and say, okay, well, what are you doing? Let me see what you got. And he said, soon he realized his technique training didn't prepare him for this. So he started looking at the words of O-sensei. And I think that's where we're talking about purpose, because we all were drawn to Aikido because of some other aspect than I can beat this person up with this. You know, someone attacks me, they'll get what's coming to them. I think there are a lot, you know, more effective ways of doing that than Aikido. So when we think about our purpose for coming into this art, this is why Paul's work has always been so interesting to me, because it's then starting to look at the way the brain reacts under stress. And that to me has been the focus of my work. Instead of doing technique, I wanted to look at how is my brain processing this instantaneous feeling of threat, and how am I able to transcend that so that I can have Aiki be my response rather than defense, which is resistant and against Aikido.
There's a lot of sympathy in this room for your purpose and for everything you've just said. You know, I'm 100% on board with what you're saying. I just think that tonight I don't want to get distracted by purpose. I want to talk about teaching methodology, because I don't think good teaching has got too much to do with what your purpose is. Actually, it might change what you actually do when you're teaching, but it doesn't change what good teaching is all about. So I want to go to Finn next, and then Laura. Finn.
Just thinking, maybe it's an urban myth, everybody's got their own stories, but the person who gets attacked with a knife on the street disarms their assailant and then hands the knife back. And the idea is with the Aikido as a practice, but are we learning something that is real, or are we learning to pretend? And I mean, I tend to the pretend, but I often get picked up on it in my classes, so I appreciate that. I don't think that's a defect in the teaching. It's more about my learning style. But also just thinking about the how traditional, whether we've broken with tradition of honoring O-sensei. We bow to O-sensei at the beginning of class, but in none of my dojos have we been sort of indoctrinated or studied O-sensei's teachings other than through the practice of living Aikido. It's interesting that the almost sort of mystical texts of O-sensei's writings that we're not actually shown.
True.
You have to discover for yourself.
True. Laura.
I think there is a strong link between purpose and methodology.
Fantastic. Tell us about it.
So, I mean, Paul often says, what is the teaching for? And I think if you intend to just indoctrinate students and transmit knowledge like propaganda, then your teaching methodology is quite different because your purpose is quite different. And maybe a traditional way of thinking about students is that they're a tabula rasa, a blank slate, or an empty cup, and the teacher is just pouring knowledge into that cup like water from a jug. And, you know, and then those students will become like copies of the teacher. But maybe we don't want to do that. And so I was going to bring up this, I don't know if you can see that because it might be like mirrored.
Yes.
But there's this famous educator called Paulo Freire, and this book is called Education for Critical Consciousness. And he's also written essays called Education for Liberation, or Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And it says here, it takes the life situation of the learner as its starting point, and the raising of consciousness and the overcoming of obstacles as its goals. So I think it is important to have purpose, because if your purpose is to empower individuals on their own path, that's really different from creating a little army of people to fulfill your purpose, which, you know, okay, right.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I mean, you could say that Hitler was a very effective educator in terms of he got a whole country behind him to do what he wanted to do. So, yeah, maybe
he was a propagandist, not an educator. He didn't kind of like empower Germany. He kind of like, he took away kind of like the choices of the people and kind of created his own reality. That's different.
Yeah, I'm buying that too, because I mean that supports me in that's you can get a lot of people to do a lot of things, but is it good education? And I'm not sure it is. Hi, Jamie. Do you want to throw in a penneth or two on what you think are key values of good education on the mat? Or in
no, I'm sorry, I missed the conversation so far. Well, I'm not sure what's been said, so a little hard to say, but you know, I think a few things are super important. One is respect. I think we have to have respect, real mutual respect for each other. And, you know, just because someone's a student doesn't mean that they're not, you know, a co-equal human being. So I think that's extremely important. I think that, you know, I don't know if you've talked about learning styles, and you know, probably have learning styles, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, left, right brain. How do people really learn? Being tuned in. And I think the whole matter of connection, I mean, Aikido is all about connection. It's all about respect. And so those things are very, very important. I think we also have to really, I mean, I remember when I started my dojo, oh my God, I was 25, and I always say it was like multiplying 0 by 0 in the beginning for like a year, because nobody knew anything. And, you know, it was this women's school, and I didn't have any senior students around to help and be examples. And, you know, it was just like, I try to explain, you know, you have to demonstrate with someone, and they didn't know what to do. And so then I'd be the uke, but then they didn't know what to do. It was just like, oh my God. So I learned so much by teaching, particularly by teaching sort of from literally the ground up. And I mean, I just really had to examine every little thing I did and figure out how to convey that. I think we have to be really good communicators. I think that is huge in teaching. And sometimes that's through words, sometimes that's not. You know, I think we also have to, you know, look at what's worked for us in our learning process, and with our teachers and varying teachers who seem to work for us or who we admire, and see what we can take from them, and but incorporate it in, because we have to be ourselves in our own teaching. We have to be in with the people we're with and where we are. Every situation's different, and so, you know, a lot of things. But I think that one of the probably the biggest thing I'd want to say is that it kills me to see that someone gets good at Aikido or golf or whatever it is, but let's take Aikido. You're good at Aikido and you open a dojo, you know, and it's like, you don't necessarily know how to teach. You don't necessarily know how to be a business person. So I think we have to also study those things and pay a lot of attention to develop our own, to develop ourselves as teachers.
Yeah. Well, let's say you were on point with a lot of the discussion, but with your own nuance, which was lovely. And I really related to opening a dojo with like 3 blind mice and struggling with them. Did you have something to say?
I'm just wondering if I've been uniquely lucky in always having generous teachers. I think not, but perhaps. But traditionally, teachers, get angry, get cross, discipline their students. I just wondered whether we've now whether that's the thing that's again is more special to Aikido or.
I've seen good and bad practice. No one that I saw the bad practice with did I bother to go back for, but I've certainly seen it, and some of them have got very big followings. Yeah. So I wanted to. Someone was talking about the teacher-student. Well, for me, a good teacher is a student. They never lose the student hat, and I think that's another key skill. And it's one of the reasons why I'm always asking people to question me, because it's one way whether I find out whether I know something or don't know something and where I need to develop. So having that sort of inquiring mind and not thinking you know it all, I think is probably a useful trait. Okay, and so what else would anybody like to add? Okay, let's...
I have a story.
First. Can I go to Joanna first? She just picked you with a hand up there.
Sorry. Actually, it's kind of more a question. I don't know about this tradition Aikido from, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago. If they have this awareness of protection and care about not hitting our knees on the floor, about the Swariwaza, what are we doing in this walking with our knees and our foot toes just wrapped, and all of our weight over it, our shoulders, our spine, our neck. How was like a long time ago? So this except you couldn't ask anything and you have to respect, and then you need to learn in silence. Do they just pass this knowledge, a little knowledge or a little awareness about protecting your own body for you to be able to practice your whole life, or it's something new that that is coming over more this past years? It's more a contemporary practice than awareness, like more a question.
I would say my experience has been mixed. Others should chip in and say what they think. But I found some people who were very aware and some people who weren't aware, and some people who took a really traditional approach, and other people who were much more enlightened, I would say. Little bit of everything you said, good and bad. Jamie, you had your hand up after Joanna.
I just wanted to tell a quick story of an amazing teacher I had. I started to play the banjo. This was years ago, and I'd never even seen a banjo before, right? And I walked into this store in Berkeley, and this woman said, "Hi, my name's Phyllis. You can call me Phil. I'm going to be your teacher." And I was like, "Whoa, okay, Phil." And that rolling sound of the banjo, I just love it. And she showed me how to do it. And it was like hard. It's like moving your toes, these forward rolls, backward rolls with your fingers. It was really difficult. I said, "Okay, cool, fine." So she sent me home, and I paid her, and I go home for a week, and I'm like, I come back a week later, and it's kind of like, da, 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 da. I'm like, okay, not really rolling, fine. Second week, what'd we do? Same lesson. Forward rolls, backward rolls. I go, okay, I don't really have it yet. So I go home. After 2 weeks, all I'm doing is this, right? I am like rolling. I feel really cool. I come back for my third lesson, and what did we do? Same thing. That was it. And now I'm starting to mouth off. I'm like, "Phil, this is getting slow and boring. Phil, I don't want to do this. Phil, I'm not paying you anymore. Phil." She said, "Just, go home." So I went home, and I'm like sitting there, I'm like watching TV. I'm going like this forever. I'm like, oh my God. I come back for my fourth lesson. What'd we do? Same thing. I was so pissed. I was like, Phil. She just said, "Who's the banjo sensei?" I said, "You are, Phil." And I went home. And, you know, by now I'm like talking to my friends on the phone. Can you believe this? I paid her so much money. It's been a whole month. Don't I sound good? Oh my God. And so I came back from my 5th lesson. It's like a month, right? Finally, she shows me some fingering up here to make a song. In 10 minutes, I whip off this like beautiful Cripple Creek, you know, and you have to like read this tablature, do this and this, like you're doing all these things. She made me do this for a damn month, you know, and I was like, oh, this is so slow, blah, blah, blah. Well, after that, she made this so, talk about kata ingrained. I just didn't have to think about this, so all I had to do was do this. And the next month, I learned 10 songs. I sounded like this really hot banjo player. So it was an amazing experience of a teacher. And I share that with my golf students. And when I've had the nerve, and when they've had the nerve, I go, listen, I'm going to confiscate your golf clubs. I'm leaving you your like 9-iron and wedge and putter for a month. And I show them what, you know, basically banjo practice. And a few of them have agreed, and they have actually progressed more, faster, even though it seems slower in the beginning. And she was a really good example of sort of, in a sense, the tough love, but she had a real, a deep understanding. So she was the sensei in the sense of, you know, the person, the teacher who's gone before. And I just thought I'd share that because it's not my typical style of teaching, but boy, did I learn a lot from that.
Wipe on, wipe off, right?
Oh my God, it was amazing. And yeah, I thought she was too tough, but she knew what she was doing.
Okay. So maybe you can give me some examples of what you think is good teaching practice. What have you experienced on the mat and thought, wow, that was clever? Hugh, I was just dying for you to chip in. You need to come off mute though.
Yeah. Actually, a sort of more of a general answer, if I may, Quentin, because there's one word that has slightly been missing from the conversation, which is inspiration. And I think when you talk to people about their teachers in any walk of life, and particularly this is true of famous people, they say, oh, you know, I was inspired by Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so in my high school. And it's a very specific teacher, it's a very specific subject, very specific event going on, and it's lived with them. And it's a story I've experienced myself, but it's a story I hear a lot in Aikido, particularly for people who've practiced for a bit. There's a magical moment. Sometimes you can't define it. Maybe it's like you're thrown halfway across the dojo and you without knowing what's going on, and you've landed and you've got up and said, how did I get over here? That's magic. And I think that, I'm sure many of the people listening tonight will have had that feeling. So I think it's inspiration, and there's a magical moment somewhere in there. That would be my contribution on that subject.
Very valuable contribution, but you now have to share what your inspirational moment was.
Well, I suppose because like one or two people, I started Aikido at a slightly older age than many people started. I would have to tell you a story based on youthful arrogance, I suppose, which happened off the mat. And it was because I'd been studying the background history to martial arts in many fields. When I started doing Aikido, I carried with me a suspicion that there's lots of secret stuff going on, and that there were special students which were taught things in a dark room somewhere, and that it wasn't reaching out to the rest of us, and I felt disappointed by that. Unfortunately, due to my youthful arrogance, I actually challenged a teacher on this subject very directly in front of quite a few people. And it so happened that man was Tohei Sensei. And of course, I'm very embarrassed to actually even repeat the story. But it wasn't so much my stupidity and arrogance, but it was the remarkable answer that I got. And he kind of scolded me immediately with a smile on his face. He said, no, that's not the case. We will make a judgment of your character. All we want, we'll give you everything that we possibly can, but all that we ask is take it with you wherever you go and spread the word. We will open up, we will give you everything, we will not hold anything back. But it's true, we won't do it with everybody. And that was inspiration.
Beautiful. Who else would like to share? Ian, you've not chipped in. Would you like to?
Well, thing is, I can't imagine things, or at least not in the way that most people can, so I'm a bit awkward to teach. And my teacher found a way around this because I'm a musician. He got me to sing and to move with, because of course I've got an advantage that I breathe properly, because if you're a singer you have to. And so that was very useful to me. I was impressed by that because my background is NLP and accelerated learning, and I think it's something that would help a lot of teachers, because you mentioned it earlier, certainly about modalities, and you cannot teach everyone the same. You just simply can't. And what I find, well, I've learned more in my life certainly from bad teachers than good ones, or bad examples, and quite honestly most martial art teachers aren't very good. I mean, there's a few who are, and luckily I've met a couple, but you just have to teach somebody how he takes it and not how you want to teach it.
Well, you were quiet for much of this session, but it was a valuable contribution when you came in. Thank you. Okay, someone else, moment of inspiration, please. Or I'll share mine. You don't want to hear that.
Well, I guess a few thoughts. I mean, it's a little, I have Corky in the meeting with a bit, but he's exceptionally good in various ways, I think I found for me, partly because of my maybe over-intellectualization. He's very good at elucidating principles as well as providing. So he's got sort of a whole theoretical scheme, which seems rare in my experience, that he can explain, elucidate very well, but also he's got nice let's say, I don't know how to characterize them exactly, but heuristics for getting the right sort of intention to connect in a certain kind of way that we are after in Aikido. At least some, a lot of us are after in Aikido. So I still struggle with it all the time, but he's nice enough to explain to me why I'm struggling. Doesn't always help me transcend the struggle. But say things like, imagine you're suspicious somebody's at the door, and but then you realize they're your friend, and these kinds of ways of getting one's mind into a better frame for connecting in the right way. So just say, I think I certainly, I've been to not a million dojos, but I've been to several, and I have not experienced that kind of thing, nearly as much, except when I have the good fortune to practice with Corky.
So is there inspiration in that?
The inspiration for me comes from the feeling you get with an Aikido interaction. It's just amazing to me. Like when I grab Corky and I find myself, I try to give him some attack energy. I find myself, I'm kind of a pleasant, non-fearful roller coaster ride. I'm on the mat. I'm not angry. I haven't had pain inflicted on me. Feels great. And that's kind of how I would like my Aikido to be. This in a way it may connect to this, what are we after issue in doing Aikido, which I know you don't want to go there too much, but I did judo for a long time, and I still occasionally will go back. And I just sort of felt like there's a million mechanical sequences for techniques that are more or less effective for throwing somebody to the ground. And it's just not that interesting to me. It doesn't inspire me. Whereas feeling a good Aikidoist, it's just an amazing feeling to me. That's kind of why I continue to do it. It's not even so much, I'm really not it. I don't fear being attacked. I doubt I will ever be attacked physically. Maybe as I get older, I have a higher likelihood, I don't know. But it's just more, it's an amazing experience to me. And it's helped me carry, I'll say one more thing. My Aikido off the mat, largely through Gorky's teaching, I have to say, has transformed the way I interact with people. Even in philosophical arguments, you know, reading philosophical, we have reading groups and stuff. I found there's an Aikido way of engaging in a discussion that can be very disarming when somebody, well, you know, they want to attack your point. It's sort of traditional, well, you said this, and I'm going to attack you. But there's a way of saying, yeah, you've got a good point. So you're saying this, and yeah, you're right. Here's what I think I should say, or whatever. So it's helped me in all sorts of ways in engaging people as well.
Fantastic. You should be proud, Corky. Okay. Steve, are you still there?
Yeah.
Okay. Long history on the mat. Who's inspired you? You can ignore me. Anybody else but me.
Well, I got a long list, but I'll go for the latest, and that is the dojo I'm now training and the people in it that inspire me more than all the others put together.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you.
Because teach Aikido, not what somebody else thinks is Aikido. I mean, I've been to courses, spent the same money as everybody else, and left on the mat doing nothing for a weekend or a week. And to me, I would normally not be there, but because I wanted to learn, so I'm still about. And you know that. But it most inspired me are the people, not necessarily Japanese teachers, but there's one I did like, and that was Tamura. He had time to talk after training and go through things with that, but he's the only instructor that would. He'd take you through and discuss the non-technical way of doing a technique, meaning the deeper way, the more meaningful way of doing things.
Yeah.
But as for Aikido not working in self-defense, why do you do it? If you train in self-defense, I think you need to go to combat school or something, because you're learning street fighting, not Aikido. Aikido is the way of love, peace, and harmony. It's not to do with combat in that sense.
Yeah, I think you'll find a lot of sympathy for that view in this room. Paul?
I think it has to be involved with combat. When I'm okay, I know what I'm trying to hurt the guy. Not that I would, but that's what gets at the cutting edge, so to speak, and gives them something to practice. If you can't feel respect and kindness for somebody who's trying to hurt you, then you haven't learned anything.
I
I
get where
think.
you're coming from. Now tell us who inspired you, Paul.
Nobody. I was the dojo outcast for 10 years because I couldn't understand anything they said, and they weren't willing to translate it for me. So I had to put together the way I've learned myself. Otherwise, I couldn't have done anything.
Corky, who inspired you?
Well, I was inspired by a series of events, I think. And when you asked that question, I was immediately remembered this event that happened when I was in a dojo from my teacher, Dano Bell Sensei, who was a student of Roderick Kobayashi, and then Tohei at the other end of the line. And then I was a first Q student, and they allowed me to participate in the black belt class. So we were doing this randori, and I had 3 black belts coming at me, and I'm trying all my techniques, and it's just as awful and ugly as it could possibly be, and I'm struggling through it, and I'm just like, how long is this going to go on? And then finally somebody popped me in the nose, and I started bleeding, And I felt it and I looked and I saw I had blood. And I thought, well, the teacher's going to call it now because we never keep going when someone's bleeding. And Don's eyesight wasn't that great and he didn't have his glasses on, so he never saw it. So the 3 attackers kept coming at me, but my intention had changed from, oh no, we're not fighting him. Oh no, it's not Aikido. No, we're done. And all of a sudden, boom, boom, boom. They perfectly were thrown without me doing anything. And I realized, oh my God, that was it. But I really didn't have any foundation to understand it. And I couldn't follow. It took me years and years and years before I understood that my intention had shifted from defending myself into connecting really purely. And that had resulted in Aikido rather than any technique I'd ever learned on the mat or learned by emulation.
Yeah. I'm going to share my, so I would say my students do inspire me. And certainly someone like Paul, you've provided inspiration on my journey. But the one that sprang to mind when we mentioned this was I was in a stage where we were sort of thinking of joining Maruyama Sensei, who was the president of the Ki Society and then set his own organization up, Yuishinkai International. And we were being encouraged to join. I'm not very good at being encouraged, really. I like to make my own decisions. But anyway, we went to the Aikido course, which was very nice. It wasn't amazing, but it was very nice. And then we went to the pub afterwards, and he was sat on the table with all the senior greys by the guy who had invited him, made sure he was surrounded by the great and the good. I wasn't one of the great and the good, I have to tell you. So I was sitting elsewhere in the room. And when the meal was finished, he got up and he sat down with a table full of Q grades. And that was when I knew he was the man for me, because I just thought that was truly wonderful that he went to the people rather than waiting for the people to go to him, and he saw the problem. I just thought that was a wonderful moment. For me, it's really important that my Aikido teacher is a great example of the art off the mat as well as on it. Linda.
I have a real quick, easy one that was right, thankfully, at the beginning of my training. So it's been an inspiration to me for a long time. This was maybe 3 or 4 weeks into my training. We were doing Kokyudosa at the end of class. And it's never too late to be young and arrogant. So even at 46, I by God, like, I'm not going to move. I'm not going to go for this woo-woo Aikido BS, like, you're going to make me. And whoosh, over I went. And so it wasn't a big dramatic fall and how did I get to the other side of the dojo, but I did it again. I was like, okay, now wait. Now I'm going to really, this time I wasn't paying attention. This time I'm really going to get him. And off I went. And what amazed me was not like what his technique was, what the physics of it were, and I'm sure there's that aspect, but that I, in the face of like utter non-resistance and kindness in the face of my obstinate refusal, I wasn't able to maintain an attitude of fighting. Like, I couldn't continue the motivation. I was like, I wanted to go that way now. And it was like, afterward, I was like, holy shit, it's a good thing this guy's on the side of right and good, because that's like a really powerful thing. And by the way, it's Dave Goldberg Sensei. But if I can like find little bits of that anywhere in anything I do, I'm delighted. But it was wonderful to be able to see it early on. So it's always been kind of a North Star for me. How do I get to that?
Beautiful, beautiful. If anyone can top that, you can speak. Paul, go on.
I can't exactly top that, but I do have a thing that Don Levine said once, for all you people who started when you're ancient. He started when he was 45. He practiced till he was 85 and died. And he said that when he first started, people said, Don, you're too old, you'll get hurt. Then he smiled and said, well, I'm still practicing and they're all dead. And Corey, I'd love to get in touch with you. Is Corey Jewell still here? Is he still on? Anyway, Corey, I'd like to get in touch with you my BA thesis, my bachelor's thesis, called Language, Truth, and Illogic. And I'm still using this stuff in my Aikido, very, very literally.
Fantastic. I've been hoping I would get to meet you sometime, and when this pandemic lets us, I certainly hope to maybe touch you on a mat somewhere. That would be
Corey, either put your email in the chat or message me afterwards and give it me, and I will put you in touch with Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. By the way, can I say one more thing to Paul? I believe my other teacher, my local teacher, Brendan Hussey, has contacted you. He has Parkinson's, and he's been practicing with us and learning how to adjust, and he appreciates
I was contacted by some sensei with Parkinson's, but I don't remember his name.
It may be my teacher, Brendan Hussey, yeah. So anyway.
Hello, and I'd be glad to talk with him too and share things.
Okay, Jamie, yes.
Yeah. I just think that, you know, I'm inspired all the time, you know, and I've been inspired by a lot of different teachers and a lot of different people. I get inspired all the time. And I think that inspiration, you know, in a sense, it lies within us. I mean, it's something within us that gets touched. So, you know, our mind, our heart, our creativity, our spirit, something gets touched from someone, some story, something, some feeling out there. And, you know, so we get inspired from inside, which isn't to take away at all from others and, you know, what all the things that happen. But, you know, I think if we, you know, just are really aware that it's what gets touched inside of us that gets inspired. And then, of course, we're grateful for those people or interactions or whatever that was. But, you know, in that sense, I think it's possible to kind of stay inspired or be inspired all the time. And I just wanted to mention one inspiration. You can see it now. We have all the recordings from our Aikido Summer Solstice Seminar, almost all up. They're at least day 1 and 2, day 3 is almost up. But on the second day, I think it was, we took a chance. We had some younger teachers, not just the veteran teachers. We wanted to give space for everybody. And speaking of teaching, right? And so there was a young Mexican woman in Oaxaca. Turns out she's only been training for 8 years. So that was, I mean, even less than we would have ordinarily thought. I think she was almost the most inspirational person. And what she did was she had a chair. She asked you to bring a chair and a hoodie sweatshirt. Virtual class, okay? So here we are. How many people have been teaching online? And, you know, we're all like solo practice and fantamukes and nages and, you know, 1,000 ways that we're trying to do a nikyo on a jo and whatever. People are being creative. That's great. So what she did was to have you set the hoodie over the back of the chair, and the hoodie part was the head. So you actually had a head and you had sleeves. So you had arms and hands. She went through all the names of the techniques and demonstrated Aidori and Katate Dori and run around and do Ushiros and Shomens and all of that. So that was great. But then you grabbed the sleeve and you actually had a hand. And then she did an Aidori and she did Ikkyo. And she did Ikkyo from standing, and then she did Ikkyo Swariwaza. Well, not only did we actually have the hand, and we could see where our hand goes on the elbow and the sleeve, and, you know, we pulled this and did some skis, and it was like fantastic. But then when she started to actually throw the chair, she took the chair all the way down to the ground, and it was totally connected. She did Swariwaza, Ikkyo, Tenkan, and the chair is going like this and whipping around. It was fantastic. It was genius. And here she's been training for 8 years, teaching a little, kids class or something in Oaxaca. She was a little nervous about her English. And I highly recommend that you watch hers. You can go to YouTube's Aikido Solstice Seminar. I think you'll find, her name was Atsiri Servin. But there were so many inspirational classes. And I think when we get something new or something creative or something's touched in us, that there's inspiration there. So I just wanted to mention that because, you know, I could say whatever, Duran Sensei, Saotomi Sensei, but I could say all my senseis, but honest to gosh, it's everywhere, inspiration.
I think you've touched on another really important point. As a good teacher, you have to dare to be different and to be authentic to yourself too. Okay, final comments.
Jamie, what was the lady's name that you recommend?
I'll write it in the chat so you get it.
Okay.
She even pinned. She pinned the sleeve and and the uke, the chair, and it was just fantastic. So I'll write it in the chat. Her name.
Finn.
It was remarkably graceful watching her. You'd think, oh, that would be really awkward. She was facing the back of the chair with the sweatshirt over, like putting it, wearing it, and remarkably realistic and graceful to watch, just like an ordinary wooden dining room chair kind of chair. But definitely watch that just as inspiration for creative teaching. It was really cool.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm just writing in the chat where to go, and you can find them all on YouTube. They're almost all up, but keep going, and you'll see a lot of great inspirational classes and
Jamie,
teachers.
where are they on YouTube?
I just try, if you can Google Aikido Solstice Seminar, I believe that they should pop up, and you'll see them.
Great, thank you.
Over to you, buddy.
For me, it's that, and the moment is that moment that recurs about 3/4 of the way through most good Aikido sessions, where I'm sort of brought back to myself, and that centeredness and all the hesitancy and worry and everything fades away from the week, and that lasts just along to the next class.
That's what provides your inspiration.
Yeah, and it's happening now. So thank you very much for everything you've done, and for Jamie as well for everything. That just reminder that inspiration is like breath; it needs to be regular. Otherwise, you can't sort of savor that one breath. You need to keep breathing, and that's a continued process.
Well, genuinely, I found this series of topics and things that we've covered inspirational, and really I go back into the house thinking, wow, that was exciting. So I really do thank you all for your contributions. I thought tonight was great. I just want to say next week we've got a very senior Tai Chi teacher with us, who reminds me a little bit of the Dalai Lama. He's just so nice and deep, and I don't use the word spiritual very often, but he definitely has that aura about him. And we're going to explore, what Tai Chi means for him. He has exactly the same purpose as many of the people in this room, which is lovely. How he expresses that off the mat, he just does loads of lovely stuff for loads of people who need it. And he's going to take us through some exercises as well. I think it'll be a really special session, so I want to encourage you to be there. Just one more, I'll just finish. And just to let you know, I'm in touch with Mary Heine. I'm in discussions with her at some point. I'll put a date up. It's going to be the only session I ask you to contribute money, not to me, but for me to pay her, because it is what keeps her going, and this must be very difficult for her at this moment because she can't get out there and do the seminars. So it will be a tenner, but I think it'll be a tenner worth spending. Paul.
I don't believe I've ever used the word inspiration. I'm not sure quite how to define it, but I realized whatever it is, it must be what I feel when I'm with you, because I feel welcome.
Well, you are very welcome, as you all are, actually. You make this very special. And I just love the fact that we're Hugh, go on.
Just a quick one, which is sort of, again, slightly inspired by what Jamie was saying just now. And that is, we're talking about teaching. And I think what is looking at the state of Aikido generally, which is what we've discussed before, and numbers and stuff like these are really important issues. But just from the story Jamie was talking about, opens up in my mind something I've been thinking about, which is basically mentorship. So how do you help younger people coming through? If they're good at Aikido, to teach better. If they're naturally good teachers, how do you get their Aikido better to make it a rounded thing and to make space upstairs where, frankly speaking, in many countries, it's very older male dominated, to put it that way. And so I'm a big believer in bringing more women into teaching and various other things. But this mentorship thing, I think, is important, of allowing people space to have a go at explaining things on the mat and helping them with it, to teach better or if they're already very good at teaching, but maybe not so good at the Aikido, to help them get better at Aikido.
Yeah, I agree.
That's it.
A better balance would be very healthy. Very healthy. Laura, are you going to close our session for us?
Lots of inspiration from you and Nick and from many people, but I wanted to say that when I practice with Steve, you know, just attacking with all my intention, and then he can do the technique sensing where I am and when I am coming, and to react and do a technique. It's like magic. And so I think that's really inspiring.
I agree. I agree. That's a perfect way to finish, I think. So thank you so much. I look forward to maybe seeing you next week. I don't think you'll be disappointed if you can make it. And so bye-bye. Lovely to see you, Corky, here tonight, and you, Corey.
Nice to see
Feel
you.
free to revisit.
Bye. Thank you, Quentin.
Bye,
Thank
Paul.
you, everybody.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Patrick. Bye, Corey. Bye, Linda.
Everybody.